There's nothing more inspiring than walking by your sourdough starter and it looking like this. So today I'm going to share with you how to make my pumpkin swirl sourdough bread, and I'm so excited that you're here. It's so popular, especially this time of year, and it is just so easy and so delicious you'll wonder why you haven't made it yet. The base of this recipe is very similar to most of my sourdough recipes, but the twist is that instead of using full water, we are substituting some of the water for pumpkin puree. Now you may have some in your freezer, you may have some that you've grown in the garden and prepared. I unfortunately don't at this time, but I do have a nice old can of pumpkin puree here that I'll be using instead. This recipe calls for 100 grams of fresh active sourdough starter. So I'm gonna weigh out 100 grams of starter. Oh no, my scale turned off. Okay, let's try that again. I'm gonna weigh out my sourdough starter. 100 grams of sourdough starter. 109. Oops, a little too full. 101, perfect, okay. Next, I'm gonna zero out my scale, and then I'm going to add 200 grams of pumpkin puree. I kind of prefer to add my pumpkin puree at this stage because I find it's a little bit easier to mix it with the sourdough starter because they're more of a similar viscosity, I guess, thickness. So they kind of mix a little bit better now rather than when you add the water. So I'm gonna add 200 grams of pumpkin puree. Perfect, okay. I'm gonna clean that up. And then I'm gonna set that aside. I may probably portion that into 200 gram packages so that I can make this again here a few more times this fall. So I'm just gonna pull my bowl off the scale and I'm gonna do my best to stir the starter and the pumpkin puree together. It's a little bit of a hot, disgusting mess at this moment, and that's okay. I'm trying a new tool, or a new to me tool. This is called a Sourdough. I got it on Amazon for Prime Days and I haven't used it yet. I'm always looking for something super easy to mix my sourdough with. That's easier to clean. So I do have a Danish dough whisk, but I find sometimes it's a little bit harder to clean because the dough kind of gets stuck in between the wire loops. But we're giving this a whirl and I hope I like it because it seems to be working very well right now. So now we have our pumpkin puree and our starters combined, and we're gonna add our water. So this recipe calls for 240 grams of water. So I just have some room temp water here in this old honey jar. Perfect, okay. Take it off my scale again. And this time I'm gonna have to mix a little slower so I don't make a real complete mess. I tend to stir with vigor and it makes more work than it's good for because I end up having a lot of cleaning to do. So if you make sourdough a lot, you know that it can be very difficult sometimes to mix your starter in with the water, especially if it's still thick and sticky because it's fresh and fully active. By combining this starter and the pumpkin, I've kind of broke those bonds already, and now it's just combining super nice. So I do like to use that process. Okay, next up, we need to zero out our scale again and get 500 grams of bread flour. So, I've got my trusty tub of bread flour here, and I'll just have to get a scoop. So 500 grams ahoy. Oh, so close. 498, here we go. 500, awesome. Ooh, this is a big tub of flour. Now that the flour has been added, we can remove the bowl from the scale. I just find it's a little bit easier to stir when it's not on the scale. And we're just gonna slowly fold in the flour. So this is going to be a little tacky. here, and that's totally normal. So we're just gonna kind of mix it up until we get to more of a shaggy dough. And then we're just gonna let the dough rest. So I'm just gonna keep mixing. So far, my little spurtle seems to be doing a pretty good job here, actually. It's firm enough to scrape the edges, get the flour off the side of the bowl. It's easy to hold, it's not heavy. Maybe I'm a spurtle convert now. This dough is very thick right now because we've replaced some of the water with the puree. So at the moment, it ain't looking all that pretty. We can get in here a little bit with our hands and kind of knead it together to make sure that we're incorporating all of the dry flour. It just kind of helps speed up the process. And personally, I almost prefer to knead a little bit at the end here rather than continue to stir. So there we go. Our dough is mixed and it's ready to set aside. I'll be back in 30 minutes to show you what to do next. After I get all this dough off my fingers. And there we have it. 3 packages ready to go for the freezer for this recipe in the future. Our dough has had a chance to rest for the last 30 minutes. And now we're just gonna sprinkle 10 grams of coarse salt over the top of the dough. And then we're just gonna do some stretch and folds to incorporate it into the dough. So you're just gonna take, if you've not done this before, you're gonna scoop your hands underneath, you're gonna pull your sourdough, and you're gonna fold it over itself. And then you're gonna rotate the bowl, and you're gonna repeat the process. So you're gonna grab your dough. This one is a little tight, again, because we've used puree instead of full water. And so it just takes a little wiggling. That's why I'm wiggling it back and forth. But you just kind of keep on picking and folding as you go around the bowl, trying to incorporate all of that salt. One thing that I always do when I'm making sourdough is I actually measure my salt when I'm weighing my other ingredients. That way I place it right beside the bowl. And when I come back from my first stretch and folds, it's always there saying, don't forget me, because there's nothing worse than going through the entire process and realizing you forgot an ingredient. So that's why I always have pre-measured salt immediately beside my sourdough bowl so that it's ready to go right after that first rest. So then just because of the way my brain works, like to flip my dough over and just kind of fold it under and make it into like a nice little ball. Just for no reason other than that's how my brain is. So I've got it. It's been stretched and folded. It's in the middle of the bowl. So we're gonna cover it back up and we're gonna set it aside for an hour, and then we're gonna come back and do another set of stretch and folds. It's been an hour and we're ready to do our next stretch and fold. So our dough has had a chance to rest and kind of relax a bit, so it should be a lot easier to manipulate at this point. So once again, you're just gonna grab your dough, you're gonna pull up, and you're gonna fold it over itself. It may be a little bit hard to see in the video, but this dough is already so much softer and so much easier to work with just after that one rest. So I'm just gonna continue to go around the circle, I'm gonna lift up, and I'm gonna fold the dough over itself until I've gone all the way around. And then once again, I'm gonna flip my ball upside down and tighten it up by kind of dragging across the bottom to make a nice neat ball. Now it's time to set the dough aside for another hour. Before we get to our third stretch and fold, we're just gonna whip up our pumpkin spice swirl mixture very quickly. So it's super easy. What we're gonna do first is we're gonna take 50 grams of dried cranberries and just chop them up coarsely. I mean, you can leave them whole, but I like to chop them because they just distribute better within the dough. So I'm just gonna chop these up a little bit. And then I'm just gonna set these aside for a second. We're gonna take 50 grams of brown sugar and add it to a bowl. And we're gonna take 1.5 tablespoons or just roughly 10 grams of pumpkin pie spice, and we're gonna mix these two together. So I'm just gonna kind of mash it together with my fork, get them good and mixed. I left out my brown sugar a little while here, and it's a little dry, so it wants to be a little chunky, so I'm just kind of mashing it down. Okay, so my seasonings are mixed into the sugar. I'm just gonna add the cranberries here and stir that all up. In the original version of this recipe, I poured my pumpkin spice swirl mixture on top of my dough, and I used the stretch and fold process to incorporate it. Yeah. What that does is gives you really nice riveting, but it's unpredictable. You can't guarantee how the dough will, or how the filling, will incorporate throughout the dough. So if you're new to sourdough and you're not confident in laminating, you can absolutely do that. But today I'm going to laminate my dough. Before I start laminating, I'm just gonna spritz a little bit of water here on the counter. This helps to prevent the dough from sticking. So I'm just gonna gently pour it out of the, so much for the gentle. I'm just gonna pour my dough out of the bowl. And then I'm just gonna kind of use my hands to stretch it out and stretch the dough. If I notice that it's sticking, I'm just gonna add a little bit more water. This is not as easy to do when the dough has like a puree built in or mixed into it. If it's just a plain dough, it goes a little bit easier, but I'm just gonna kind of press my dough out, make sure it's not sticking, and kind of stretch and go this way, and this way, and this way, to kind of create a large rectangle of sorts. The goal is to kind of stretch out the dough without tearing it. So I'm just kind of patting it open here. And what I'm gonna do is add some of my swirl mixture. And I'm just kind of trying to make sure that I spread the brown sugar and the seasonings kind of evenly with the cranberries here. Then what I'm gonna do is I'm going to lift up the bottom portion of the dough and fold it up about 1/3. Then I'm gonna add a little bit more of my top filling mix here, and I'm just gonna kind of put it along this seam that I've created. And I'm gonna fold each side into the middle, stopping in between to add a little bit more filling. I'm gonna go that way. And the last bit of my filling, I'm gonna pour right here. And I'm going to kind of stretch it backwards a little bit and roll it into a log. So now, instead of having to do a third stretch and fold, we've done the lamination process, which also builds strength into the dough by stretching the dough. So this is now ready for the next step. I'm gonna pick up my dough, I'm gonna put it back into my bowl, and I'm gonna set it aside to bulk ferment for 2 to 3 hours. It's been a couple of hours and our dough is now done the bulk fermentation. So when we look at our dough, we can tell that it's ready to move on to the next step because it has relaxed quite a bit and there are some bubbles forming on the surface. It is still a little tacky, but we can move to the shaping process. Once again, I'm gonna just use a little bit of water here. I'm gonna spritz down the counter to help prevent the dough from sticking. I don't wanna use too much because I actually do wanna use a little bit of that stick to help me shape the dough and to create a little bit more surface tension. So I'm going to turn my dough out onto the counter and you can see it just kind of drops nicely. And if your dough looks like this, where the sugar has seeped out and created a little bit of juice, that is totally okay. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna flip that together, pinch it a little bit to help seal that. And then we're gonna start to press out our dough a little bit. So this might not be the most orthodox process for shaping sourdough, but it's the one that I use and it works really, really well for me. So what I like to do is kind of turn my dough into a little bit of a rectangle, and I'm going to repeat the process that we used when we laminated our dough. So I'm going to fold up the first third like I'm folding a letter, and then I'm going to fold in both sides. Oops. Oh, it is a little bit sticky. It's harder to work with dough when there are inclusions. And in the original format of this recipe, I actually did not go through a shaping process. I bulk fermented in the banneton or in the shaping bowl and then went from there. But as we get better at sourdough, we attempt more complex things. So I'm just gonna fold it, like I said, sides in, pinch the seams to keep the sugar syrupy goodness contained, and I'm gonna fold it over. And throughout this whole process, what I really want to do is make sure that I'm not tearing the dough. So I want to work with the tension of the dough, but I don't want to rip it. So I'm just gonna gently roll my dough into a log. Now that we've completed the pre-shape, what I'm gonna do is take my bowl, invert it over the top. This just kind of keeps it protected, and I'm gonna let it sit for 30 minutes. Then I'm gonna come back and we're gonna do the final shape on this before we get it into the banneton to finish the proofing process. It's been about 30 minutes and my dough is ready to go. I have a bench scraper here just in case the dough is really sticky, because I don't want it to tear if it sticks to the counter too much. But what we're gonna do here is we're just gonna create a little bit more tension in the dough. So yeah, I'm glad I brought this. It is a little tacky. So again, we're gonna lay it down. We're gonna make sure all those seams are nice and shut, that we don't have sugar leaking out, because that will kind of make a little bit of a mess in the banneton here. Everything looks all right so far, so I'm just gonna do the same as I did last time. Just give it a gentle push. And I'm gonna roll it up. Because I'm using a round banneton, I don't wanna fold in the sides. I'm just gonna kind of tuck the ball in underneath itself and drag it along the counter here. But I have to be cautious because I don't want to pull too tight so that my cranberries kind of tear through the surface. I can kind of feel them starting to get close to the edge here. So I'm gonna stop right here. What I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna put a little bit of rice flour on top of this because the dough is still quite tacky. I'm gonna rub it, and then I'm going to put this inside my banneton and set it aside to proof. So we wanna take our dough and we wanna put it, oh, yes, you can see how sticky of a mess we got at the bottom here. So all we're doing is we're gonna just take this. I'm going to quickly wash my hands. Okay, hands are clean. I'm not going to dirty my banneton. So I'm going to take a bread bag here. I buy these in bulk at a local restaurant supply store, and they work so good. So not only can I use them for proofing my bread, I can also use them for my bread once it's baked. I'm going to close the bag. Now that our loaf is in the banneton, all the hard work is done. We are just going to set it aside for another 2.5 hours. All we're looking to see is that this dough relaxes a little bit and then rises slightly in the banneton. And then we're gonna put it in the fridge overnight and we're gonna bake this off tomorrow. And don't worry about the stickiness. We'll fix that once everything relaxes. My pumpkin sourdough has been in the fridge for just under 24 hours and it's finally time to bake. This loaf is definitely by far not my prettiest. It is a little lumpy and bumpy here on the top. A lot of that has to do with the sugar inclusions, but when you're talking sourdough, you're gonna bake it anyways, so it doesn't really matter what the bottom looks like. To address the like kind of juicy liquid area over here, what I did was I just took a piece here and I gently stretched it after it had sat in the banneton for an hour or two and just kind of stretched it over and tapped it together. It didn't alleviate the whole sticky mess, but it will help. Some may seep out onto the parchment paper and that's okay. But all in all, I'm happy and I'm ready to get this into the oven. Before I invert my banneton onto the parchment paper, I want to show you a little trick. So if you moisten, I'm just using a spray bottle because it's handy. If you moisten your parchment paper and crinkle it up good, like real good, like real good, what happens is it softens and it doesn't leave indents on your bread. So anyways, that's a great little tip. That's the sort of thing that bothers you when you put your bread into the Dutch oven and the parchment paper kind of leaves crease marks on your dough. Just gonna get a couple things ready here before I invert my dough. I don't want to leave it upside down out of the banneton longer than I need to. I want it to kind of keep its shape as well as possible, especially one with like juicy juicy inclusions like this one. I'm just gonna take my banneton, put my parchment paper over top. I'm gonna flip it over, and then I'm gonna slowly lift my bowl. So we can see our dough here. She ain't perfect, but I think it'll bake up okay. I'm gonna take my sharp bread knife or lame, and I'm going to do a nice deep score. I personally like a curved line, so that's what I'm gonna try to do today. Yes, it's better if you get your whole body into it. I'm just gonna give it another little score here. And take a peek, make sure I like that. Okay, that is good. I'm gonna take out my preheated Dutch oven. So before I got to this point, I preheated my oven to 450 degrees and I put my Dutch oven inside of the oven. I also put the lid on the rack beside the Dutch oven because I find it's a lot easier to put my bread in there when it's on the side rather than have to take it off. So for ease of showing you guys, I'm not gonna leave it in the oven. I'm just gonna kind of pick it up and I'm gonna carefully drop my loaf into the Dutch oven here. And this is gonna go back into the preheated oven with the lid on for 30 minutes. In 30 minutes, we're gonna come back and we're gonna remove the lid, and then we'll bake it for at least another 5 or 10 minutes, just until we get the color of crust that we like. It's been 30 minutes of the sourdough cooking with the lid on, and we're ready to take the lid off. Whew, that looks great. So this, the crust is still quite light. I'm not happy with that, so we're just gonna put it back in for at least 5 minutes, and we're gonna come back and check on it. The sourdough has been baking uncovered for 8 minutes, and I think it's ready to come out. Whew, still hot in there. Oh, it looks great. So, and try and show you, it actually did not spill out a lot. There is almost no mess down on the parchment paper, but I'm just gonna pull this out and try to unstick it from the parchment where it did stick a little bit. We had a little sticky spot there. And I'm just gonna transfer it to a wire rack. All I've got to say is that it's a really good thing. One of my kids has a soccer tryout right now, and we have to leave for a couple hours because this right here looks and smells so amazing. I cannot wait to dive into it. But for best results, you should wait at least 2 hours or until it's cooled to room temperature. But I'll be back and show you what the inside looks like. We're back from soccer practice and our loaf has had a chance to cool, and it is looking and smelling even better than before. So I think it's time to cut it open and see what we've got. I think I want to go this way. Looking at the top, I can kind of see that my swirls are going this way. So I kind of want to cut across them to get a little bit more ribboning in the bread. When you're doing a loaf like this that you've rolled up together, it's kind of hard to tell which way to cut, but we're going to give it our best shot. Moment of truth. It looks awesome. So we can see here all of our nice ribboning throughout. It's all swirled all the way into the middle. That's where that laminating process comes in clutch. But this loaf looks amazing, and I really hope that you are going to give it a shot too. One of my favorite ways to serve this pumpkin sourdough bread is to actually serve it toasted with some of our homegrown raw honey. It is so delicious this way. Warm, gooey, with fresh honey, you can't beat it. Okay, that was maybe a pretty big bite, but this is so good.